Hello everybody, it's your boy Amuser in the house, and you may be wondering, what's going on here? I'm actually uploading a video for once? Well yeah, you see, something pretty incredible is happening at the moment. For reasons I'm not even quite sure, I've gone back to playing an old PC MS-DOS game called Inferno, the Odyssey Continues. And let me tell you, there is quite an enigma around this game. I'm sure the first question you're asking yourself is, what the fuck even is this game? But it's an old space flight sim game from 1994, if I recall correctly. Back when I was a kid and Windows 95 was still a thing, my dad did something pretty cool, went to the computer store that was in our city, and bought us a 5-pack of games, and one of the games included in this 5-pack was Inferno, the Odyssey Continues. And compared to the rest of the games that were in the bundle, Inferno was much more massive in scale. The scope and promises made by the game's advertisements sucked me in right away. I've always had a bit of a vendetta against this game, because it always bugged me how it seemed to go on and on and on forever, without a finite end. Plus, when I was a kid, 8 years old or so, when I was not even knowing what I was doing in the game, and I got my first game over, the lights were completely out, and this face horrified me and scared me from playing the game for a whole month. Unfortunately, by the time I figured out how to actually complete missions in the game, we got rid of our Windows 95 and moved on to Windows Mistake Edition, I recall correctly. But only recently have I been able to get this game to work in a playable state and actually play the game. I will say, though, that the game hasn't aged well. It doesn't look good, it's kind of choppy sometimes, and there's a lot of questionable design decisions which I'll go into shortly. But the thing about this game that it's most remembered for is its soundtrack and the cutscenes. For anyone that even knows what this game is, about half of them will probably ask the question, does this game have a good ending? Does this game ever end? Which is a fair question to ask, because I think most people that played this game were under the impression that pretty much the whole thing was procedurally generated, and nothing you did actually affected a story that leads to a finite end. Both out of nostalgia and curiosity, I've kept playing and discovered that there is indeed a final act to this game. There's a less than obvious way to begin the final act, and there will be a point where you can game over regardless of how many extra lives you have. This brings me to the main point of this video, to talk a little bit about how to get into the final act. Because, believe it or not, there is zero documentation on the internet or anywhere or from any person or thing that even explains this. There are several reasons why there is literally no recording or no proof of a finite end or a good ending that exists. First and foremost, the game's repetition pretty much killed everyone off from ever playing that long to get to that point in the first place. On top of that, there's just straight up some things in the game that do not line up. Especially missions where you do them successfully. Everything in that mission indicates that you did your job correctly, and things went successfully. But you'd get back to your brief, and the chief would roast you for God knows what reason. It literally didn't.
Commander, I trust you have a good excuse for your behavior today. It was shameful.
What could I do? It's death or glory for those alien chaps.
Remember, Commander, the fate of all humanity rests on your shoulders.
Literally didn't add up sometimes. With briefs that were inconsistent and didn't line up sometimes, and the repetition of the game, it would be very easy to think that this whole game was just a sandbox with procedurally generated levels till the end of time. Any sane person would have probably stopped and given up on the game. But I'm not sane. Anyways, I did play this game quite a lot. Dealt with all the repetition and all the fun jazz that comes with that. Until I saw the mission where I started to notice things were actually changing. See, after about 25 hours or so of playing, keep in mind this entire time, there's no indication of progress anywhere in the director's cut. But if you keep playing, eventually the chief will tell you about a particular myth. He says that there's a lull in the conflict and he wants you to look at something. So the chief sends you out to a ship graveyard area full of debris just floating around. And the thing that he wants to show you turns out to be the mothership of the original Epic crew of the prequel game called Epic. This is the only time in this game that any reference to Epic is made in the first place. So I knew that something special was going to start happening at around this point. Or so I thought. I noticed after I finished this mission, which lets you fly around inside the Epic mothership briefly, despite it being completely barren, I noticed that some missions appeared to have been recycled, like I was doing an old mission I had finished. Out of disappointment and thinking that this was the closest that this game was going to have to a finite end or a good ending or something like that, I proceeded to throw in the towel and start suiciding my lives so I can put my final score into the high score chart. What I didn't expect, though, was that when I had gone down to my last life, a special track started playing called the Dramatic Tune, a tune that I didn't think made it into the final cut, and something that I thought may have been unused music. But the way it came out, the way the dialogue opened up, everything started to come to life before my eyes, and it terrified me. So apparently, after you do the mission with the Epic Mothership, apparently you're supposed to purposely lose all of your lives so that you have no spare ones. And once both of these things are done, it seems that the final act of Inferno begins. The reason I don't have footage quite yet is because I can't figure out how to beat these missions, because they are just so fucking off the wall, insane difficult compared to anything else you've seen in the game up to this point. In the final act, there are a series of 3 missions, and I'm not 100% sure if you can actually beat the first 2 missions in this act. The first 2 missions involve trying to get inside of the main Rexon mothership and trying to destroy the command center into the center of the ship and bring it down. Once inside the ship, you have a strict time limit to do this, but if you're too slow, something inside the ship starts to happen, and you have to get out before the time limit happens, or you go boom. If you get booted out of the mothership, the missions fail, but you have to survive long enough to be able to retreat. I'm not sure if either of these missions can be beaten and the game would end, but if you fail these 2 missions, there's one final mission that pops up. In this third final mission in the act, you are tasked with transporting the rest of humanity, protecting a ship that they are all inside of called the Ark. If you are too slow destroying enemies inside of the Ark, they will plant a bomb somewhere, and you have to get out of the Ark. The real kick to the gut is that once this happens, you are screwed. Even if you get out of the Ark in time, there's still a death timer that appears even though you will be in space at this point. And the final message you'll see before you die is, "Brace yourself, Commander. This is the only event in the game where a timer will kill you in space. There is nothing else in the game that does that." So this is a pretty serious, finite wall to where if you fuck up, the game will end right here. I'm currently in the process of trying to figure out how to beat these missions. So stay tuned, and I'm sure, hopefully soon, there'll be footage of them. And who knows, maybe a good ending for once. It's only been 24 years.